Yeah, ready to start? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to the November 13th meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Before we start, Mike, would you like to lead?
Sure.
the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under liberty, with liberty and justice for all. All right.
I guess that was the ancient pledge. Okay. Well, good evening all, and thank you for coming, for tuning in, and those of you who are going to watch this on a delayed basis, for tuning in. Our agenda starts off with just a few comments here that I'm going to make relevant to the Littleton Common Revitalization Roadmap. And just a few framing comments. This is not intended to direct, but simply provide a framework which you can either object to later when your turn comes, or use as you see fit. The first question is, for whom is that I try to understand, for whom is the roadmap intended? And in its entirety, it's a public document. It's for everyone. And there are various uses, so the expectation is that, at least from one point of view, that the final document will have various sections in it, including appendices and technical guides, in accordance with what a particular reader may require in order to get information and to take appropriate action. My suggestion is the focus should be on what I would call the initial steps, including those that need long lead times and steps that take us to completion, for example, of zoning, the start of actual build-out of the first 2 or 3 anchor developments, I'll call them. And I think the roadmap in its entirety should be, by definition, subject to adjustment. I want to say somewhere between every 3 to 5 years. And we can adjust this accordingly as we see fit. I don't see this as a document that gets extended out much beyond that because of possible changes. The main elements, I think, have been pretty well defined by Julie, who's joining us by telephone tonight. That's infrastructure and basically the pathway to achieve it. And finally, the other components that I'd like to see, or I'm hoping to see, are metrics. That is, measurements that tell someone, as they're moving through this roadmap, that the goals are actually being achieved by what measure. For example, we will know, I think, by looking at our development pathway, that successful, as I just said, 2 or 3 anchors have joined in. That would include commits to mixed use, zoning regulations in place to inform any build-outs. And finally, I believe that this roadmap should contain a map, has a beginning point, where we're coming from, where we're starting from, and where we're going. So even if they're simple images, I think we'd be well served by having in the document a clear picture of not only where we're going, how we might, shall we say, reach an intermediate point, but where we're starting from, in order for the roadmap to, as it were, have some, shall we say, sense of, shall we say, time and accomplishment. And with that, I'll be very happy to I'm pleased to open up our discussion. Try to keep your remarks as brief as possible. I'm not going to put a time clock on it, on the assumption all of you have a good sense of best use of your time here. Does anyone wish to start first? I'm just going to arbitrarily start with Mike Fontanella. Welcome, Julie.
Yes, thank you.
Julie, before I dive in, do you have anything you would like to preface the discussion with?
I guess I should say, based on Mike's great intro, which is all very, very true, of the intent of this, just a couple of things to note in terms of where the status of this and our next steps. The team thought that having the committee first take a look at the contents, the context, the textual information, the descriptions, a Word version of this roadmap was the first step to take, because not to get into the weeds too much, but to make a real roadmap like Mike has described is what we intend to do, but that then turns into a very graphically oriented document, which is sort of the secondary step in the process. So after us working through the type of information that you see here and want to see here, or want us to beef up, we then will do that before we then put it into the roadmap itself, which you then would see the next step. So just to give you a sense as to why you're seeing this type of, fairly basic report format in front of you is merely just because we want to be sure that we've gotten, we're accurate on the right information, we're in the right direction in terms of what we've provided, and receive feedback on what we need to include or add.
Okay. That's great. I'm glad I asked you to chime in, because all of my concerns are very much oriented around the things you just talked about. I think that the content and the writing, I think, is excellent. I think it hits on everything that we've been driving towards since we started this process. And I really don't have any immediate feedback beyond that relative to the content of the report itself. I'll take a closer look. But, I mean, I read the whole thing, and it's very familiar. It's a lot of the things we've been talking about and hitting on. I thought it was well organized. I thought it was well presented for someone who's actually going to go and read a document like this. I'm not sure how many people that actually is, but some of us do exist. My concerns were more that it is not illustrative, but you've assuaged that concern because you told us it's not supposed to be illustrative yet. It'll be illustrative, as we go through the next steps. I think that, Mike's opening remark was, who is this intended for? It's a public document. That's all well and good. And there are some people that will consume it in its entirety, but the vast majority of people will really only consume the illustrative aspects of it. Show me what you're talking about. Don't tell me. I think that, if we do as good a job with that as we did with the actual content here, I think we'll be in terrific shape. And I'm looking forward to seeing the first pass at that. And as we go through this discussion, I'd like to just know roughly what the timeline is for seeing and I know you guys are waiting for feedback on this before you're ready to commit to that process, but once we are committed to the process, I'd just be curious as to when we would get our eyes on the rest of that document to see what the illustrative part of it looks like. I really think that's it. That's all I got.
I could touch on that briefly. We've talked a little bit about a potential timeline. Obviously it depends on when the committee is able to turn around edits or comments on this text version. But from that point, let's say that was, at some point 10 days from now, we then need approximately 4 to 5 days to turn it into an edited document and then the graphical document.
Okay.
The process is essentially, after editing, we then take the text content and place it into basically a fancy graphics design program like Adobe Illustrator, for instance, and it will spit out a very illustrative document. So I definitely hear you loud and clear. And I don't know if you'll be able to see what I'm looking up here, but we found a great template that I've shared with Mike, Anna, and Myron that I think is one of the most exemplar types of, let's say, roadmap, blueprint type of document, because it can be taken piece by piece. So whereas, not a committee member might want to just go straight to one section, that's the intent of what this would be.
Is that the citywide plans for North, Central, and South and Cedar Rapids? You talking about that?
That,
Yes.
yeah, we have that, and that, the one page that we're looking at looks like it would be very interesting to peruse once it's fleshed out.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested, we do have that in a template form. We didn't want to overwhelm you too much, just, to have you look at that type of graphics, but maybe after you've had a chance to digest the text, we could talk a lot about that layout. But that's basically the type of thing we're looking at, is a very, very illustrative roadmap document.
Okay, great. Now, when we say illustrative, like this particular one, and I know it's one page of what I'm sure is an encompassing document, it's a grid map type thing. It is an illustration. But at some point, I would assume that as you get into it, there's like street views, of the potential storefronts and business fronts and things like that, correct?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Right now, we're just trying to
Yep.
make some determinations about,
Gotcha.
and I think this is a good template, because
Right.
you have larger graphics that you need to have on one whole page. Like, for instance, we've got all of the scenario planning renderings, the 3D graphics. That's a big piece of illustrative information that would go on one page, and then you lay out the next page like this one with pictures of what we're suggesting representation,
Right.
with photographs.
Okay. I'm very excited to see that. Looking forward to it. And I'm glad that you're talking about like days, week 2 weeks rather than 6 weeks to months. So that's terrific. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Great.
Okay, Anna?
So if we're talking about content, a couple of questions more than anything else. So the zoning piece of it, Julie, I was wondering, I see that on page 17, you talk a little bit about the assessment. Two of the scopes of work included the zoning diagnostic and the assessment or framework, and so I was wondering where we're going to see those.
Yes. So I will admit, kind of that's where I struggled a bit to have something formulated, because I'm not landing in the right place either. Sorry about that. I wasn't sure how much to go into detail with respect to what specific language changes are required, for instance, in the base zoning. We have. I'm struggling to figure out where I'm looking here. Okay.
Yeah, I can give
We
you
have.
the area in just a second. I was looking at it for my computer, trying to use less paper. So the section that I'm talking about is specifically section 2.2.
Oh, okay, 2.2.
Yes, the very end of 2.2.
Okay. So there was a couple of places we wanted to talk about zoning. So we wanted to talk about existing zoning, which is what we attempted to do here in sort of a background way, meaning that in order for people to understand who reads this, why we would suggest the type of zoning changes that we suggest, we wanted to lay out what the somewhat issues or deficits of the existing zoning that relate to being able to implement the preferred scenario of that level of development density. So there's that specific need there in terms of what the zoning changes would include. So the 2.2 section is supposed to be that semblance of a diagnostic, so to speak, to lay out what you have and what compliance there is currently. And then,
Well, I guess I would have to ask Maren for her input as to whether or not what is in section 2.2 is sufficient for what we contracted for.
Okay, off the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to come up with that, but
Okay. Because one of the things that I just want to make sure that we sort of check the box, if you will, is that if in the future some work needs to be done and some future consultant says, oh, well, you know, whatever happened to that assessment or the diagnostic that was done, and if there's something more that's required, we should make sure that it's included in this document. The original intent of that, even if we go back to the RFP as to what the intent was for getting that, and just making sure that we have it. So that might be another way to look at it, Julie, is going back to the original RFP that you all responded to and seeing if there's something more to add.
No, I agree. I think that we will need to,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
You know, in looking back at this, there's definitely, I do see the distinction. This is more of a description, however, the
Yeah, and
diagnostic needs to be documented.
Right, I didn't see it anywhere else, and it could very well be something that just needs to be, you know, in the appendix of this document, but wanted to make sure we touch base on that to get it in there.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's good. I'm glad that you might be open to a piece for the appendix, because what we have currently that isn't here is sort of like, I don't want to call it a flow chart, but almost something like that, where it's more note-based and a little bit clunky, but it can be something that can certainly be delivered in here
okay.
in some way.
Well, and that's actually a great segue in terms of my next comment about content. Knowing who our audience is and having gone through this with the master plan as others at this table did, it's over 200 pages and eyes gloss over. But one of the things that we did request the last time from the Update Steering Committee consultant was to try to provide something at the front end that would be almost like an executive summary. And to me, Chapter 6, I actually envision that as being the first thing, or, you know, right after a few explanatory pages, so that people can get right into it, and then go back to all of the other history of how we got to that point. It's just more, I think, getting the information out as soon as possible, because I do know that when I show the master plan to others, their eyes just, you know, roll back in their head like, what? So,
Right.
so
No,
Judy-
I hear that, and I think that's a very good suggestion. I had been thinking about it because we were always going back to this to sort of check in with ourselves, and it's best if that sort of immediate series of recommendations just come right forward, because the other piece that isn't in here, and I know you received, I believe, but there's an action matrix that would then sort of provide, not just, it would sort of bring you back to that at the end again. So if we did provide this level of you know, planning to action up in the front, there's a way that we can tie it all back together with the action matrix that we're still, you know, pulling together, which is something like this.
Right, exactly.
This was, sorry?
Yes, I would agree with that. And the pages, again, to the master plan that are similar to that are like pages 214. So if we can make it closer up, maybe we get more people to actually take a look at it.
Mike, can I interrupt to, I really would like to support what Anna was saying. I mean, I think particularly if this is going to be a document that's going to be widely disseminated, not just for those of us who've been working on this all along, but for lots of other people, that, you know, the way it is now, you spend a lot of time plowing your way through both the existing conditions and then the work that was done, which is certainly necessary and vital to have. But I think Anna's suggestion of moving basically the information in chapter 6 toward the beginning of the text, I think would make a lot of sense and give some idea, you know, kind of what we're proposing, where we're going right at first, rather than sort of spending lots of time telling everybody how we got there, which people want to know maybe, but I think is a secondary, should be put secondary anyway.
Let me emphasize, this is one of the reasons why I think it's a good idea in chapter 6 as we move it to front, that we at least acknowledge where we're starting from, because the action plan basically takes us from that point. In other words, it would be good to refer, in my view, to even a single image of, shall we say, the current state of the common, and after that, what need more to be said except what's in chapter 6 to get us to a different place. I'm sorry.
I second that idea.
Yeah,
I think
that's good.
Yeah, and having all the information is in the document is important.
Yes.
But for people who kind of want to get right to it, what does this really mean? Let's
Yeah.
do that. Okay.
Yeah, I had the sense that, that was one of perhaps something that could have been changed even at that public forum that we had, you know, a few weeks ago, that sort of giving a real sense of where we intend to go would have, I think, caught people more than the way it was laid out.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. You want me to keep going?
Oh, yeah.
So Julie, I had a question on page 4, it's chapter 1, introduction. Just a question. It says, led by the Master Plan Implementation Committee, the purpose of this revitalization planning was to, and then you list out 5 things on there. Is that something that you all created in terms of what you heard us say?
Yes,
Okay.
we may not have gotten it right.
Well, no, I actually think you captured it really well, so I don't have any comment. I just couldn't remember us saying that, but I thought, yeah, that's what we wanted to, that's what we're doing. So I thought that was good.
Good, thank you.
2 more pages down, I did have a question around, it's under section 1.2, roadmap concept. And you take a couple paragraphs to talk about something called lighter, quicker, cheaper. And it was really wasn't something we had talked about before, so I didn't know if that was necessarily relevant to us, given that I don't remember having gone through that part of it, so.
Yes, you're right. You know, I can reframe this. I was searching for a way to describe, and maybe it's just something that needs to be simple, but to describe that essentially, yeah, and you know, I'm starting to realize I didn't really connect the dot here, but
Yeah.
we're trying in the action matrix itself, and in some way to describe that in the executive summary, that there are things that the town can do up front to almost sort of set the stage. It's not necessarily lighter, quicker, cheaper only. And so I think there's 3 elements. One is a phased approach, if you will. We're calling short-term, long-term, and short-term, midterm, and long-term within the actual actions matrix, which we should probably refer to here. But this lighter, quicker, cheaper is also a secondary piece where, in the absence of funding for infrastructure improvements or capital-based projects, there are these things that can be done that are truly like somewhat public events or somewhat marketing type of events, that they're calling them light, quick, cheap because they don't involve a lot of investment or, you know, allocation of funding, but it builds this momentum that, okay, well, we have this roadmap, but we're not putting a project down on the ground today per se, but we are going to do this program and we're going to keep people involved. We're going to get people excited and keep them that way. So it was my attempt to just to describe that, but I can see that maybe that's not really coming through here.
Okay,
I can revisit this.
okay, all right.
Can I just make a comment on that? I appreciate Anna raising the issue, and I appreciate you, Julie, willing to reevaluate it. However, if it does change form significantly relative to the roadmap, that's fine and potentially necessary. However, the concepts I like a lot, and as a group, I wouldn't want to lose them just because it doesn't belong exactly like this in this particular document. And if we can find a way to just, if it does evolve, that we put it off to the side and say, as a town, we're strategically thinking about how to get there. As Julie said, a lot of the stuff is going to be capital-based, and it's going to be mid and long-term, but to try to engender that sense of community and usage that we're striving for in the long term, to plant some seeds and get there, these are some good ideas that I wouldn't want to lose just because this wasn't the right location for them.
Well, and I agree with you. My whole point was, though, that we had not discussed
No, I agree that, and that's
so-
why I'm not necessarily, I think you might be right, that it's got to get reshaped relative to this document, but I want to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater
Right. Okay, I'm
at the
good with
same
that.
time.
Yep, I'm good with that. Okay.
Okay, I can reform this for sure. It doesn't even need to be described in that, term, and it may actually be better if it's not. But I think it might be best if I was able to at least say, talk a little bit about the phasing, talk about how there's, these short, mid, and longer term projects plus these public engagement-based work projects. So I can reframe that.
Okay. I have a few more. So on page 15, when we talk about zoning code, which is 2.2.1, you reference industrial zone A, and so is that, because that's not, the common itself isn't zoned industrial, but everything up in the Beaver Brook pad, like by the point is. So I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about.
I think there is an industrial A piece further up.
There is?
If I remember right.
Pass that over.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Maybe I'm missing it then. I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page.
I think you're right. I was trying to figure out where I saw.
Because isn't it
I know
this
that
side of
there's
495?
part of the
Yes.
industrial B,
Yeah.
Right,
but
but the line-
I will double check how
Right, the
that.
line between the business, on the IBM site, the front of that site is business, and the back of that site is industrial A. So there is
So there's a leakage up, well, it leaps
Okay,
495.
We're looking at the zoning map right now, so I'm getting educated about that piece.
Yeah, there's a leap. It made a deer-like leap over 495 is what the problem is.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Maureen. So that's, okay, that little triangle back there. Okay, that makes sense then. Thank you.
It made sense at one point and probably may not go from here going forward.
Yeah, yeah. So at some point, Julie, when we get to the nicely laid out document like you have, will you be sort of popping out certain content that, highlighting it or color coding it or anything like that? I ask
Oh,
because
yeah.
there are certain
Yeah.
phrases that I thought, oh yeah, that one definitely is a big aha idea, and it would be great if we could, really make it pop out from the rest of the content.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have some thoughts on things that we want to sort of put out in like a box, a text box. But if you see something as you're perusing this, please you could even just highlight it and let us know, and we'd be happy to take that suggestion.
Yeah, I can send you an email on that and copy Maren, or have Maren send it
Okay.
to you.
Great.
In terms of content-wise, on page 24, there were some town priority sites identified.
What section? I'm
You
sorry.
don't have
Sorry.
on this page numbers.
See, the one time where I do it electronically and. Okay, so this is going to be, under 3.1.2. Identifying the soft spots, and in it you say, and town identified priority sites, e.g. Donaldson's, the Cotton Factory. Are those just examples, or were those actual, because if somebody reads that, they might think that somehow the town identified those as sites.
Right, okay, that's true. Let's see, included, yeah, that actually shouldn't be worded that way. I think what we were trying to say was that to select the sites that we would end up doing the feasibility testing on that resulted in the scenario graphics, that's kind of what we're trying to describe here, is that, you know, we tried to select sites that needed some investigation. And I think maybe that's a better way to just to term that, because
Okay.
it's not necessarily town identified clearly. It's just that we wanted to investigate some potential for instance, the mill building is a different story with potential rehab and rehabilitation and reuse versus, you know, something like a Donnellan site that has a big spread with a, you know, large parking and a couple of different type of buildings. So it's not that those are the properties per se. It was like more of the type of property.
Okay,
So I guess we'll change that.
okay.
Just for community context, Donaldson's is well regarded as a community institution by a significant portion of the community. So you really want to be discreet in terms of how you phrase it. If it looks like we're targeting Donaldson's to go away, that would not be good strategic thinking for us.
Yeah, that's.
Right, okay. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not what we would want anyway.
Right, no, I agree, right, I know, right, you know that, and we just want to make sure that we don't lose that in the weeds, or inadvertently
Yeah, okay.
convey that by mistake.
Okay, and then, moving on to section 4.5, conclusions. So there was, the very last paragraph on that page, it starts with, as the population of Littleton is expected to gradually grow. I reread that.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I lost you, Anna. Which section again?
Oh, it's under section 4.5, conclusions.
Right, okay,
And
got
it's
it.
the last paragraph on that page. I get overall, I think what you're trying to say is that rental is the best way to go instead of condo, but there's something in that paragraph that just doesn't quite make sense in terms of understanding why that is. Does anybody else, others read that and just see?
Where are we, Hannah?
I think it's in the economic impact section,
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
or am I in the wrong place? It's on 4.9 in the.
No, 4.5.
4.
Well, I'm looking at figures which don't,
Mine actually says 4-16 at the very bottom.
oh.
Oh, so I guess those are kind of like page numbers.
Conclusions?
Yes. So at the bottom of 4-16, it starts as the population.
Okay, I read that.
We don't have 4-6.
We have 415. but
We have 415. Yeah,
And I can see the paragraph, as the population of Littleton is expected to gradually grow. Okay.
Okay, so you do see it
Yes.
though? So does everybody understand what that paragraph means?
Yeah.
Because it kind of sounds like what you're saying is that with rentals, there's always demand, but with condos, there isn't? I just, need a little bit of
I'm
explanation.
stumped as well. I'm sorry. I think this is a question I'm going to have to check in with Rod about.
Oh, well, if Rod wrote it, there you go. That explains it.
There are other issues.
Yep.
Let the numbers guide you writing.
Yeah, because building units and other structures, condos among. Yeah, I'm not sure where he's going with that.
Okay.
So I will check.
I mean,
Sorry.
I think what he's trying to say is that there will be more people looking to rent, and you have a better chance of filling the market if you overbuild, if you build out the potential number of available units to be developed that are owner-driven. You're not gonna have that many people looking to purchase, and you might get caught out as a developer. You put too much supply for not enough demand. And as a developer, that's the risk. For the developer, for the town, it's irrelevant, as long as you don't mind having some empty units. But I think you should check with him to make sure. That's how I personally am reading it, that
Okay.
you have a lower probability of overdeveloping rental units than overdeveloping purchase units, i.e. condos.
Okay, that makes
Okay.
sense. I'll ask him that.
Okay, yeah. And then the final one about, let's see if I can find it here. It's going to say action 6-1 at the bottom, so it's under chapter 6. Number 2 on that page says promotion of the vision for the common through volunteerism, establishment of a Mpic subcommittee to advocate implementation of the roadmap after adoption. So we are a subcommittee already of well, we are,
No,
we're an
we're not.
offshoot of,
We're not a subcommittee, we're a distinct
well,
committee.
a
I mean, you
distinct
may
committee.
wouldn't think of us that way, but that's because you're on the planning board.
A
But that's not who we are.
A distinct committee that was created from the selectmen.
So
and
every
the-
other committee is created by the selectmen.
Right,
So they're
right.
all,
And
yeah.
so I just didn't, I wanted to ask, does anybody else think that we would be creating a subcommittee?
Well, I think it's legitimate to not constrain us to having to do it as a subcommittee. I think that the verbiage should be more along the lines of, making sure that the MPIC in their infinite wisdom doesn't stop worrying about the common revitalization just because we've got a deliverable, that we should continue to be the ones that kind of push the process. How we choose to do it, whether it's through subcommittee or through the overall work of the whole committee, we'll figure that out later.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is a great opportunity to be able to connect the upcoming zoning work with public engagement, and that's why I think Mpic will still be very much involved in all of this.
In its entirety, yeah. I agree. Maybe a different MPIC,
Yeah,
different faces.
we can only hope. Yes. Well, after a while,
So on that note, I mean, should I say that differently? Is there just that the MPIC will really guide that?
Yeah, something
Yes,
along those
yeah.
lines, and dispense with the subcommittee terminology.
Okay, all right.
And if you have anything else?
Other than to comment that I think having the town folks to review it at some point will be good. There are definitely things that have gone on in the last couple of months, whether it's the transportation shuttle that's now coming from the train station to the senior housing bylaws that got passed at town meeting, and obviously the sewer design that got passed at town meeting. So definitely we'll kind of need to plop those different aspects in.
But right now, all that stuff, except for the transportation, the actual buses moving around, that's all on paper. There's still no development, still no forward motion on those. I mean, it's part of, it has always been part of, as it were, the master plan. and it's moving along.
Oh, I thought we actually had a shuttle that was
Yes.
stopping at.
We do, I
Idaho.
said, except for the shuttle.
Mike said except for that.
Oh, except for that, yes.
Yeah, and I'd even be careful about the sewer too, because we
Exactly.
approved the design, but not the build yet.
Right.
So, I mean, I think you're right, as we get those things in place, as part of the community outreach, you know, making that part of the dialogue is ideal. We're still gonna cross a couple of finish lines.
Yep.
Lyle, you're up.
Let's see. If we're doling out awards, Mike gets the award for having read the whole thing. I hope my award is still on the shelf somewhere, because I'll engage more when it's more illustrative. Mike read the whole thing. I maybe get up to chapter 3 before I started skimming and said, okay, I was at these meetings, I know we talked about this, I'm done. So, I don't have a lot to contribute, but I commend everybody who has, and I've cracked Commonwealth of Massachusetts regulations more times than I care to remember over 30 years in architecture, but I've never written that, so I'll try to enjoy the ride.
Okay.
Okay, well, I am somewhat in agreement with Lyle, and it's one of the reasons why I very strongly supported Anna's suggestion of putting the new stuff first, because I was reading along a lot of the things. I said, well, I've read this several times already, and I didn't have much time, admittedly. I was kind of pressed, and so I got sort of bogged down a little bit in all that. I like the way it's going. I think, I think we got a lot of good stuff there, and I certainly seconded earlier on. I seconded strongly Anna's suggestion of putting a lot of the stuff in Chapter 6 earlier on. The one thing that did, make me think a little bit, maybe wording could be changed, is that in subsection 212, under housing, here we get into my expertise, you say, is within a Massachusetts Historical Commission historic district. Well, I guess that's worded vaguely enough, so it's probably accurate. That is to say that in conducting the survey for the Massachusetts Historical Commission in their standard form, the formats that they use, there has been an area study done of the common area. But when you say historic district, that to us historical commissioners implies either A, National Register district, or B, a local historic district, neither of which we have. And so I would recommend saying something more along the lines that this area has been surveyed as a historic area and is recorded with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, something like that, rather than using those fateful words, historic district, which a lot of people get all confused about anyway, but it's better not to further confuse them. Okay?
No, I get it. I agree. I agree. It can be confusing. I think that's good wording.
Okay, that's the only thing that I was able to really focus on.
I'm sorry, Lyle has a discovery.
I didn't have anything new to contribute, but with Jonathan coming back and reinforcing Anna's point, I might have been more enthused about my reading if it started off with some sort of preamble to let me know where we were going. So on vacation over summer, I did read cover to cover the whole 67 points of the master plan, but I didn't read this past week, I'll be perfectly honest.
All right, and I'll just
Okay,
bring,
I hear that. I need to keep people enthused,
Yeah.
so that will be changed.
okay, I just want to bring up sort of the not necessarily the end, but just some minor points. It gets confusing as you read through, and since we're on the inside, as it were, we've been living with this for quite a while, I have to admit, it took me aback to realize that in the economic section that was done by the fellows from Donahue, and more than likely edited by your gang, it became clear that what Rod, I think, has done is that his economic analysis is based on a very, very small, a relatively small slice of Great Road. And if you read his document and all the data on which he bases his tables, the numbers work out very nicely. That's exactly what he did. You can sort of add up all the assessed values. I don't want to make more of this than is, but in the text, it is not made as clear as possible that this is almost a study area within a study area. So in other words, the economic projections, and I'll use that term advisedly, are based primarily on a small piece of the total common. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very sensible thing to do because the strips that he chose, the areas that he chose make a lot of sense. And the areas that were excluded make a lot of sense. But in the text, he does not make that as clear as it should be for the reader. And there are many folks, believe it or not, who are interested in, if something happens here, what is the tax benefit to the town? That is a question which arises. So I think that should be made more clear than it is in his text. I try to find it, but it slips away.
Okay.
The second, and the reason I want to make that point is because I want to make sure that Rod understands I'm not trying to get the numbers changed. Just simply make sure that he understands, or that it's understood in the reading of it, what he's referring to in his, shall we say, his projection.
Okay.
All right, the second has to do sort of a mix with housing and the meaning of mixed use. And I realize those are two separate terms, but in the scenarios, which I'm sure you're going to show, at least one of them for sure, that's a total build-out of scenario 3, which could occur, and there are many, shall we say, variations going up to that point. I was wondering how difficult it would be, or how useful it would be, and the committee should join in. There's a particular part of Massachusetts which Littletonians do refer to with some affection as being, shall we say, not necessarily typical, but the kind of redevelopment they want to see. And it's a little place called West Acton. Now, I'm not going to comment on the charm of it or whatever, but stylistically and impact-wise, it is basically a step away from where we are now, but it definitely represents a step along a continuum that fits into, what we'll say, a variation on scenario 3. And I'm merely suggesting that somewhere in the illustrations and in the discussion that you don't have to basically call it West Acton, but basically take that picture of that area of West Acton and use it as an inspiration for an image that incorporates, shall we say, certain elements of scenario 3 to show what could be.
Okay.
That's all I'm promoting here, as opposed
No, I hear it.
as opposed to a full build out, which very frankly goes beyond, in my view, the time scope of this roadmap.
Right.
So in other words,
Well, what do you say the time scope is of this roadmap?
to me, the road, I already indicated that at the beginning. Somewhere between, I'm trying to get our committee to agree, disagree to this, but I'm viewing this roadmap as being, I'm just going to start with no more than 4 years. It originally started out 3 to 5, but 3 to 4 years, beginning, and I would turn the clock on when the first, shall we say, when the shovel goes in for above-ground development. Now, it may coincide with the first step in the sewering, but it's what goes on above ground that triggers, in my view, because that would tell us that the first shovel going in to do, as it were, structural redevelopment above ground would signal that we've got the zoning in place that tries to, as it were, shape and mold what it looks like. So I would start the clock at that point and project 3 years out, 4 years out from there, and say that's where the roadmap takes us.
I understand your point you're trying to make. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't convey it like that's where the roadmap takes us and then we're done.
Oh, no, no, no,
I
no.
would say that it's after 4 years subsequent to the first breaking of ground, it will be time to reevaluate if the roadmap as it's currently constructed is still sufficient to the purpose based on changes on the ground, economic changes, political changes, tax base, demographics of the town, et cetera, et cetera. And it may be that, you know, the first time you take a look at the roadmap after 4 years, it's very minor to editing because not that much time has passed. But the third or fourth iteration, you will start to see fairly significant changes from the initial iteration because of, so in that respect, I would agree with you.
Yeah, I'm perfectly.
I don't
happy with
know,
that. Yeah.
and I think conveying the idea that it is a living document that will need to be reevaluated at a suggested timeframe of, you know, every 3 to 5 years, I think is fine. I don't think we have to be too explicit about it's 4 years, because we
Yeah.
don't know.
No, I don't know.
You know, we don't know. You know, maybe it's 2 years. You know, if the zombie apocalypse happens, then it's gonna be 2 years, you know?
If we're the master plan implementation committee, though, do we need to be earmarking, reserving, whatever the correct town terms is, for putting some money aside for reassessing every?
Yes, I mean, I'd like to make sure that somewhere in our work, we make it clear that what we're doing what we're doing for the first several years is not the end, as it
Yeah.
were, and that the town should not take its eye off
And
the
that
ball.
jives with the discussion during the master plan update process about an implementation committee, that it would be a body that existed pretty much for the duration. The only time I would say that this MPIC would be dissolved is if a new master plan is
Yeah.
developed, and then those guys can decide if an implementation committee is appropriate. And some might argue, no, at that point, it's up to the zoning board and the board of selectmen and all the other committees to get it done. In some communities, that's exactly how they view it.
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily argue that that's the correct viewpoint, and when we came to a consensus about a master plan implementation committee, it was very quick and clear that the master plan update committee fully supported, and the consensus was easily achieved that the MPIC was the right way to go. But future
Yeah, I have no, yeah.
communities,
Yeah.
iterations of Wilton may decide otherwise.
So I'm agreeable to the language, it just communicates the, shall we say, the adjustments and revisions and revisiting that would have to be done. And I'm not married to any particular time, I just want to make sure that we weren't getting ourselves into a roadmap that was asking any of us, including Julie, to project out.
I would throw out one other thought. It may be that after a certain amount of time, that the common and revitalization of the common goes down the list of priorities for the MPIC, just because it's going well, or there's been a lot of progress, and now it's just time to direct energy at other aspects of the master plan that maybe got short shrift initially because this was a higher priority. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Well, and ultimately, I think, I would
Go
envision.
ahead, Annie. I was just going to ask a kind of a specific question, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, yes, I would agree that the implementation committee is probably going to be working on this for the duration of the next, 12 years, because the master plan itself is through 2030, so.
Well,
If-
a committee like ours might
Right,
be doing, I have
right,
no idea.
exactly.
Yes.
You'll be around, don't worry.
So, Mike, is this kind of the area that you were referring to? Do you see it up here?
No, we don't have your video.
I don't know if you can see this, but this is,
No, we don't have your video feed.
you can't see it?
No,
I don't have a video feed.
Well, this is just brought up, okay. Well, this is, Mass Route 111 around the number of 525 Route 11. This anyway, I'll send the picture, but I think I understand what you're saying, because this looks like a whole little redeveloped village
This is
area.
West Acton that you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah. That was a particular Village Works put together by Thought Forums, et cetera, big deal.
yeah,
Yeah, and people bring
Okay.
it up a lot.
I understand.
By the way, just to be clear, I'm not looking for, other members may, I'm not looking to replicate it. This is simply inspirational.
Yeah, it is a precedent that a lot of people notice and comment
It's
on.
important also to find scale and design that it resonates.
That's the part I'm looking forward to, so you guys can dig into all the words you want, but when you get the pictures, I'll be ready.
And then the fun begins, yes. I think, I'm certainly waiting to see the next, shall we say, or the next version. And very happy that you're going to be including images to show what's going on, and also to make sure, just to reemphasize that although scenario 3 comes up to be preferred, I think that the roadmap should, shall we say, be somewhat constrained to make sure that folks get the idea that the full realization of scenario 3 could happen, might happen. It's not where we necessarily have to head.
Okay,
And I want to make sure that everyone here understands that we are going to be using metrics to measure, as it were, to give us some idea of if we're moving along the axis of the roadmap. Good. Maren, do you have anything you'd like to add from your perspective?
I did find a favorite paragraph.
Oh, let's have it.
Let's see, under section 2-5, vision for the common, the second paragraph. Although some residents were apprehensive about new development, the majority of the public providing input expressed enthusiasm for the potential of the future common. Balancing the desire for new vitality and the fear of incompatible change, stakeholders helped shape a scenario for the common that serves as a thriving center for goods and services, entertainment, and activity. Just thought that wrapped up a lot of the work.
Okay. Oh,
Here.
quickly.
okay. Which brings me, I'm sorry, I need to bring the caboose up again, and I'll stop. On the printed material, 2-4, at the very bottom, it's printed out, it says transportation, and underneath there is an illustration, or a table, in my version.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure that you see it.
Yeah.
Okay, now that has, as far as I can make out, Julie, that has nothing to do with transportation. That's a table having to do with
Sewer.
either the sewer, or this is the amount of water that pours out after a storm, or maybe they're the same. Could you indicate what that table refers to?
yeah, I know what you're talking about, I'm struggling to find it, hang on.
And transportation just needs to be at the top of the next page.
Yeah.
This?
Yeah, I think this is stormwater. Yeah, I think what happened is that there's a table of,
No,
No, it's water use.
it's wastewater, you know.
okay, whatever it is, it took me about 5
Double
minutes.
check it, double check it.
That's all. Just be careful of that one, because that could lead to mass confusion. Yes.
Yeah, I don't need to, I was thinking of taking that out, that doesn't seem to be very intuitive anyway. You know, what do we need to say more about what an entire enormous study has said? I think it doesn't do anything.
Okay.
Good. Delete.
Or it may not, I didn't want to prejudge its
No,
value.
doesn't
Okay.
belong there.
Okay. All right, if there are no further questions, or no further comments from our group, so I think did we give you sufficient material on which to work, direction?
You
Julie?
did, and I must really, truly commend you. I have to say, I've done a lot of work on these types of projects, and this is the best level of feedback I have ever gotten. And I think the team's really going to appreciate it, because clearly we can't produce the right product without knowing what's going to work for you, and this definitely helps us.
What do you mean, you can't read minds either? I have that problem as well.
Well, yes, thank you. I think this is great. And honestly, if there's any other thoughts in terms of just sort of enhancing things, like, for example, what Anna said about, text boxes, or even pulling out, the phrasing that Marin liked, just let us know, because those are the types of things that we can do once we get into the graphical sort of artsy stuff.
Oh, that's going to be the power. Don't underestimate that. And by the way, if you do end up doing inspired by West Acton, whatever that is, don't hesitate to use the art form of form-based code to, as it were, without ever saying anything of how it looks.
Yeah.
Marin, by the way, is interested in gatekeeping and timing. So, Marin, you wanted to remind us about timelines.
Yeah, how quickly, when do we want to set the deadline for getting any detailed comments to me, so I can feed those to Julie?
Beyond what we
wanna-
have tonight.
Do you want to be as early as next Tuesday, or do you want to be working on this over Thanksgiving? or-
I'll have mine to you tomorrow.
Okay, perfect.
I would argue that Anna's gonna do the most work on that anyway, so if she's gonna be done, then we need to all be done.
All right,
That's your,
Right.
if she can do it by then anybody else that wants to can do it by then.
Do you have our comments, however, in any recorded form, Julie? I want to make sure that that you're not left hanging.
Actually, I think I might be able to record this conversation unless you guys feel uncomfortable with that.
It's an open meeting,
It's an
we have
open
no
meeting.
choice.
Yep.
Well, we will have, the
Yeah.
video will be up on LCTV also, but that takes a few
Oh,
days.
right, yeah. But I did take pretty extensive notes, so I think
Right.
I'm feeling pretty good. It's just,
Right.
if there's anything that you see that you want, you can shoot me an email or any type of feedback. I think Marin's just trying to figure out, if you want to spend less time than, having it done by next week, and then we can take it away, or, yeah, I'm just trying to get sort of a general frame of, when I should put this in my calendar,
Yeah,
Tuesday.
Yeah,
I'll have you my stuff tomorrow, so.
yeah, great. So I'll send Anna's stuff tomorrow when it's in. I'll have a few more comments next Tuesday, and a couple other departments. I've asked them to weigh in on Tuesday and let me know if that time frame doesn't work for them. So,
or, all right, great, that sounds good.
Okay, so we can let Julie get back to the real world without West Acton? Okay. Thanks a lot, Julie.
Thank you all so much. This was very, very helpful.
Okay, you're very helpful for us.
Have a great evening, Julie.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hate hanging up. Okay. Never can tell when Mattis is on the other end. Okay.
You've had some bad experiences in that regard?
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for doing the homework. And for those of you who did very little because of whatever reason, I hope this inspires you to go back, and you have until Tuesday to do some more mining. Just imagine, Lyles, that there are images there. Okay? Okay.
Yeah, reading that text was actually a little challenging.
Yeah.
The font, and I mean, it was just,
Okay. The next thing I'd like to bring up is directly connected with what we're about, and there's some urgency having to do with the fact that we're working against a clock that has to do with the town meeting, which is coming. And that has to do with how how we are able to handle the contract to carry out the assistance required for form-based zoning. And it's, Marin, correct me if I'm wrong, or impression, but given the amount allocated for this $42,000, we are in a position to go through any procedure just about that we feel is fair and equitable to select a contractor to do this work. So what I would like to do is open up the discussion about whether or not we want to look at Fort Point as being one of 3 or 4 or 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever of possible consultants to assist the town in form-based code.
Can't they be one of one?
It can be one of one. I just don't want to
I
just.
just want to make sure that that's an option, because you didn't say it.
I said, yes, it could be one.
You said one of 2, one of 3, one of 4.
Yeah,
You
well,
didn't
it could
say
be one of one. It could be
Okay.
one of one, yeah.
Let the record stay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it could be one of one. We could stop where we are now, or we could ask the question, is there someone else for any number of reasons that we would like to reach out to and see what they could do? One of the major elements just to remind you, is not just the skill, which is very important in doing form-based code. It's not something that's widespread quite yet in this part of the world, but it's coming. And the second thing is outreach. It is not a simple matter to, you can't design by committee. I don't care what it says, there's no design by committee. So there's an art form also to how you engage the public with what you have in mind with zoning, and that includes the planning board and the board of selectmen. So I'd like to open up the discussion, if you want to have one. I think we should, about, do we want to stop at one? Or do we wish to entertain others? And then we could, if we choose the latter, we have to discuss how we're going to do that.
So my thought is that there are, my assumptions in thinking the way I'm going to put it on the table is that there are a limited number of firms in the area that have significant experience in form-based code. None of the other ones besides Fort Point have done work in Littleton to the extent that Fort Point has done relative to the common revitalization, which is where form-based code is going to be focused. So I would struggle to understand why we would expend time and energy, especially when we're working on a deadline with a fairly short calendar, to get somebody else in. I don't see. I think there's a very low probability that we're going to say, get someone in here and go, wow, you are so much better than Fort Point would be at this. We're going to hire you right now. I just don't think that would happen. I think we would be almost wasting our time.
Okay. Fort Point is going to have to bring someone in onto their team.
Well, that's up to them. How they execute
Okay.
on it is up to them.
Okay, so it's not going to be literally
Yeah, I
Fort
get
Point.
that.
Okay,
I get that.
okay. Wow.
So having joined this crew in June, I don't know what you did to land here, but I've been nothing but impressed with Fort Point, and knowing how much time I have to offer, I'm going to side right along with Mike to say, I don't have time to offer any more, figuring out if there's anybody else who's anywhere near as good, and all the ground that would be lost for all the time that you've already spent getting here would be time wasted.
As I said, I have to,
You've asked, and I commend you for keeping it open.
please.
Maren, do you have any sense of?
Wait, I'd like to hear where you're coming from before you
No,
get
because, I mean,
cued by Maren.
Because I really don't, what do I know about this? Nothing.
No, you've
And-
worked with Fort Point.
And I'm very happy with the work we've done with Fort Point. I see little reason to go anywhere else, but I was asking Maren, as a professional in this area, whether she
We'll come to her.
has
I
a
promise.
sense of who.
We will come to her.
Are there lots of other people around who could do this, and therefore we should look at them?
We will
or-
come to her. We will come
Or
to her.
aren't we gonna get
Okay.
anywhere if?
So you're fine with Fort Point?
I'm fine with Fort Point.
Okay. Anna?
Well, I think there are pros and cons in the sense that the pro, as Mike has stated, I think one of the things that we want to be very mindful of is, I think, there are times when I think Julie has perhaps not brought forward the work in a timely manner and through sometimes not any fault of her own, but in terms of working with anybody else that she's going to bring on. So to some degree, that there has to be some new entity, new people brought on board regardless of whether it's through Fort Point or some other completely different entity. So, that's the only thing I wanted to bring up is, there are going to be learning curve, no matter where we come from. And I think no matter who it is, it's going to be new for a lot of people. So, sort of feel like, from a timing standpoint, if we're truly looking at getting form-based coding to the planning board, and we want to try to get it to Springtown meeting, it's gonna be a lot of work, because it's going to include a lot of public engagement over the next 3 months. So, you know, I would say that if we had more time than what we perceive to have, then we might want to consider opening it up. But if we're looking at a compressed time frame, then 4 point it is.
Okay. I'm looking at the risk-reward aspect of it, much the same way that Mike Fontanella and I think Anna and probably the rest of us are looking at it. There's a piece of this, however, that I want to direct to which I wish to direct our attention, and that's the public engagement aspect of it. And I want to make it very clear that as hard as this committee has worked, I'm going to have to ask even more. And the reason for this is that, as Anna has indicated, it's basically going to be a learning curve for the technique itself, the method itself. Represents some sort of learning curve, which I hope is smooth and constantly rising. However, I would like to bring as much awareness and savvy to the public engagement as possible. And therefore, I would be looking to our committee increasingly, if Fort Point is, you know, it looks to me that they're going to be the ones, where we take a, shall we say, a bigger role than before in thinking about and designing and making sure that the approach to the public is appropriate and effective.
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but we've been through significant public participation exercises with the master plan update. We've been through significant public participation exercises with the common revitalization. Why would we think that it was gonna be any more complex or difficult? Right, I mean, I think we've set a reasonable expectation of how to go about it. We know how to reach the people. If the people are gonna be interested, they're gonna show up. I don't find it to be any more challenging than anything we've already done.
I'm going by reading the experiences of other towns.
I mean,
I'm sorry, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it, and I don't have any assignments ready tonight because we don't have anything going on. I've looked at the experience of other towns who've undertaken new stuff.
Well, then now you're making me nervous, because now I'm thinking Anna's point about a compressed timeline is, should we be using such a compressed timeline if it's gonna be as involved as you're conveying it to be?
I don't know why you leapt to that.
Because if we're gonna have to, if it's gonna be that complex and it's gonna require that much, how can we possibly?
I didn't say anything about complexity. I said,
Well, you're basically saying that there's education, and in the reading that you did, it seemed like it was a lot of effort.
in terms of how something is framed, presented to the public, when you're talking about a zoning change, okay, we are going to be showing them images. And in general, people respond very strongly and generally positively to images. I just want to make sure that we see and participate as much as possible in making sure how that's presented, the way it's presented, is very clear and takes into account this is Littleton and not another place. That's all.
Yeah, circle back, we always do that. We've done it with all the charrettes, all that stuff. I don't see the problem.
Okay, well,
I mean, I appreciate you saying, you know, you gotta be all in to get it done the right way. No,
That's it.
I
That's it.
appreciate you reiterating that, but I don't consider this any more, requiring any more effort than we already have expended for these exact kinds of things. We pulled it off, we'll pull it
Well,
off again.
if I can interject,
Please.
it'll just be a new experience.
No, for sure.
But I think from a timing perspective, we had asked Mara to talk a little bit about the timing. So if we go to Maytown meeting on May 6th,
it's April. We have to have everything done by April.
March.
March.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, because you have to back it up, because it's new bylaws, right?
Mhm.
New
Zoning bylaws,
So-
the hearing.
So So it actually needs to be approved by the planning board March 6th? Would that be like 60 days beforehand?
Well, you have to have the wording, the proposed zoning bylaw amendments in a very, almost final form by beginning of March.
Okay, so that's why I was saying, it's going to be a lot of work.
Do you have to have the hearing after that, or?
You can have the hearing after that.
Oh.
Right. So,
December, January, February is it.
Oh, I get that part of it, no problem. That's a different to me point than Mike's making about, I know it's gonna be a sprint, and we're gonna have to be ready to be available to do it. That part I'm fine with, I get that. But it actually leads me to a question, what's the discussion and the appetite on the zoning board? Because ultimately, they will present the articles at town meeting, correct? I mean, I don't mean present it in the sense that they're going to make the presentation, but it's going to be their article.
correct.
Because, so have
Well-
you guys been discussing this? Are they, because I don't want to do all this work and then find out that 3 of the 5 members of the planning board are like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I don't want to do that at all.
Well, Julie is the one who came to talk to us about form-based
Mhm.
coding, right?
Right.
Refresh my memory, yes. So they know it's coming, my peers know it's coming, and we've talked about it in terms of, it's something that we have to be prepared for. But
Well, I guess my question is, I would expect them to be prepared to debate on the margins of the suggestions, but I would be woefully disappointed if they think if they came back and said, I don't like form-based coding, I don't want to talk about it at all, throw the whole thing in
yeah,
the
no,
trash can.
that's not what
Okay.
we are at all.
Okay, good. All right.
They're
I
on
just
board
wanted to
with
make sure.
form-based
All right,
coding.
good, okay.
I supported the article.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
And I think
Okay.
you might as well try, because worst case scenario, you withdraw the
Right.
warrant from the.
And go for the fall town meeting or something like that. Okay, that's fine.
Might
Thank
as
you.
well try.
Yeah, I don't mean to start, I mean, I'm not worried about confidence, I'm just saying, this is something we should be paying attention to, along with some other things, so
Yeah.
that's my only point.
December, January, February for planning board to wrap their arms around it and embrace it. And then we would have March through May to inform the general public, so they show up at town meeting with no
No, in
surprises.
order to get to the draft, you have to have the public input.
Right.
on-
Well,
but-
yes, that's true, but then you have to go get community support to actually pass any bylaw, suggested
Right.
bylaw changes,
Right.
which is gonna be a 2/3 vote at town meeting, correct?
And
So,
the zoning bylaw.
you're both correct.
There might be people who get excited and invite some friends from March to May, but sorry, I think probably maybe a few crickets and 2 or 3 townspeople might care at all about this, so.
Well,
We'll see.
If you're linking it with the revitalization of the common, which is gonna be linked with the potential sewer
Sewer.
funding,
If
it's
people
gonna be a
show
rock
up-
and roll in town meeting, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes,
If people show up, amen, hallelujah, we're just happy to get them to vote, so.
Mayor, what do you think about moving on with Fort Point from this point on, to the question he was, that
Yep,
Jonathan wanted to ask?
Right, given what I've heard from everybody, would be nice not to have to worry about a new search process for finding a different consultant. There are only a handful of sub-consultants that can do the actual writing of form-based coding. Julie's picked one of them to be on their team. I'm very comfortable with that.
I did some checking around, just so you know, and of my own, this is not authoritative because no one asked me to do it, but he looks good. He looks very good. There's some nice stuff
Mhm.
from his,
The person
Yeah.
that Julie would be
Yeah.
talking
Right.
to.
Right. Yeah, so we have that. We have the record to date of Fort Point doing 2 different types of public involvement processes, then plus meeting with the planning board and meeting with you, so we can.
okay. So it looks like we're going to move ahead, I'm sorry. you wanna
I was
say?
just gonna say, so probably the most important thing is getting that contract done
Mhm.
with Fort Point ASAP and getting them to create a timeline for us.
I think we, I mean, I'd hate to go after Julie, but we'll go after her again with this, with the
Mhm.
contract is, because I'd like to get that nailed. Okay, I was waiting for this meeting to resolve it, so if we're all agreed, Anyone here opposed? All those in favor? I have a motion to re-engage
Is there a
with,
question, or?
I'm sorry.
I was gonna first
Yeah,
or
I
second.
make a motion that
or
we-
I-
Thank you. Wait, we have a
I make a
motion.
motion that we negotiate with 4.2 to perform the form-based coding consulting necessary.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I hear none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion, okay, we're on record. Okay, thank you very much.
Were you disappointed, Mike, that you didn't have to speak about this at town meeting?
Speak about what?
Form-based code?
No, not disappointed at all. I wanted to say as little as possible. They had, I mean, Chase did a great job explaining something far more complex. Form-based code is trivial. Okay. Are we ready to discuss resources?
I have a very high-level overview. 4 points spent, almost all the funds available for all the work on their timeline to date. The remaining is a piece of the zoning work that they would have going forward. We had the 2 prior bills. In estimating the next bill that's coming in, Julie said they've done a very good job of spending most of the money.
Okay, there was a question about a particular set of charges about stakeholders.
Mhm.
I want to know if that was resolved to,
No, that's not.
no discussion or just?
No discussion.
And that's because we haven't had a chance to do it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's on me.
Okay, can you have a closing date on that so we can get some resolution of that?
Mhm.
And definitely get in touch with Ann and me when you have some feedback on that.
Yeah, will do.
Okay, I just wanted to, and how much is left, would you estimate?
Well, on the zoning work, I think there was 18,000 to start with, and they've spent a chunk of that. My guess is about half of it remaining.
So there's about 9 left. Okay. That's what, I came up with like 78 or something, that's fine, okay. All right.
Now, will they be spending that on the?
Yes, on the work going.
Form-based
Yeah.
code will be?
Yeah, because we're going form-based code, so that's one of the
So, but did we
decisions we
have
made
any-
tonight.
Right, and
But-
when they put their proposal in for form-based code, it was in addition to the funding that they
Oh.
would have available.
So that's the import. Huh? Yeah. Okay, so that takes us now to public input. Don't see any. Member input, item number 4. Just one comment. Mike mentioned the fact that in a different subject, different context, that Mpic will be moving on at some point from concentrating on the common. There are matters arising having to do with space utilization, a strong desire, high priority placed also on the item for a intergenerational community center that's connected with the space needs assessment. And I don't know if anyone here has been attending or paid attention to the space needs group that's been working on this, but they seem to be working on trying to deal with what to do with park and recreation and how to enhance the space needs requirement of administration. I have not heard any discussion other than in general terms. We're also looking at capital costs that shrink, shall we say, are in excess of $27 million to do a lot of the work going forward, but nonetheless, some thought should be starting on how a lot of this gets financed. So there's plenty for us to do. Okay, we have a minutes action to take.
Yep, the draft minutes in front of you from September 25th meeting. The good news is department clerk, assistant for me, started today.
Woo-hoo!
Oh, wow.
Congratulations. What's her name?
Lucia. And she's starting working on the October 23rd minutes, so by the time next we meet, then we should have those draft minutes ready.
Okay, and what will her tasks be, as far as you're concerned, with respect to this committee, if any, other than minutes?
With this committee, she helped me make the copies of the handouts for tonight's meeting, for example, and grab the nameplates for me, just freeing me to do more of the professional level tasks and
Thank you.
fewer of the administrative tasks.
The more the better. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's great news. I'm glad to hear that. It's very important that we have you full-bore professional, especially now.
Yeah.
So
And the other,
we're gonna do the minutes?
I'm sorry, yeah, I just want to come back to the
Okay.
minutes.
Okay.
Do I hear any corrections on the minutes, changes for the September 25 minutes?
Yes. Paragraph, or item number 4. Do we want to say the planning department, or do we want to say planning board? It's in the first sentence
Mhm.
and then the 5th sentence.
Yeah,
Okay.
or, that makes more sense, thank you.
Second to last sentence is incomplete. It says, "To fill explain how application for affordable housing." I'm not sure if that's. That's it.
Okay.
So we know what the rest of that sentence is supposed to be?
I'll come up with something good.
Well, then my question is, do we need to wait till we get to the end of that sentence to approve the minutes?
To go explain how application, the process to apply for affordable housing.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Do I
Friendly
hear
amendments.
a motion to
Make
accept
a
the
motion to
minutes?
accept the minutes from September 25th, 2018 as amended.
Second.
I hear no further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. I believe, I'm not sure, I want to double check. Yes, that brings us to the
Upcoming minutes.
the upcoming meeting times. And I take it since the response, with the exception of one individual, two, I think Chase mentioned there was one meeting he had to miss.
Mhm. Yeah, the February 12th might not be good for him, and then
Megan,
Is
Megan.
that winter break?
Shared,
12th, it's the week before.
Okay.
That Friday starts February vacation.
Okay, so we're good then.
and Megan shared that the second Tuesday of odd-numbered months are not good for her. So if we need to shoot for another date, March.
Can we do Wednesdays?
No.
No, okay, easy enough.
I think the schedule looks fine, and everybody is just gonna make the meetings they can make. As long as we have a quorum, we're good to go.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we have to do,
We
we
start
have to.
nipping around,
Yeah,
we'll never get everybody here. every time.
And also, we're working, we have to be on time with our stuff, so we can't start mucking with the meeting time.
I will almost certainly miss the January meeting.
What's your excuse?
Well,
I'm kidding.
Go and visit these very distant offspring of ours.
Okay. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion adjourned.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.